Hard to answer because, let's face it, we Americans rarely put ourselves in other people's shoes. Two important essays by Dmitry Trenin in Foreign Affairs and Eugene Shausovsky in Foreign Policy provide some clues. Both suggest that Putin has stayed in power for over 20 years not by being a reckless gambler, but rather by being careful, even rational. Trenin points out that Putin has watched 4 waves of NATO expansionism since he took power. His military incursions have usually been reactions to events rather than grand initiatives of his own. In 2008, it followed Georgia's decision to retake the separatist province of South Ossetia. In 2014, it came on the heels of the Maidan uprising in Ukraine that drove President Viktor Yanukovych out of office. His one significant military intervention in an area that was not historically part of Russia's core security sphere, Syria, has been limited, mostly using Russian air power. In the case of the invasion of Ukraine, Putin's first effort was to bribe Ukraine with an offer of $15 billion in loans and lower prices for gas, a reward in a sense after it rejected an association agreement with the European Union. Yanukovych accepted the deal, igniting the Maidan protests, and then fled his country. Then Putin annexed Crimea. In recent years, he's tried to get the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, to make a deal on the eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass, which is home to the highest proportion of Russian speakers in the country and where Russian army irregulars have been fomenting an insurgency. He tried to get the Germans to push Zelensky to accept a referendum in eastern Ukraine on secession. From the arch-conservative Alexander Solzhenitsyn to the liberal reformer Mikhail Gorbachev, Russian leaders have regarded Ukraine as fundamentally tied to Moscow. Ukraine's first 2 presidents, while asserting the country's newfound independence, were careful not to break too sharply with Moscow. According to a census conducted in 2001, almost 30% of the country's population spoke Russian as their first language. Putin's dilemma is that Ukraine is in slow motion escaping Russia's grasp. In the last decade, the country has become more independent, democratic, and pro-Western. The West, in turn, has been cooperating and assisting Kiev in ever greater measure. But Putin is probably also conscious of the reality that an outright Russian invasion would create what he loathes most, a permanently anti-Russian Ukraine. His goal then is to get the Americans and Europeans to recognize that Ukrainian membership in NATO is a step too far. He also wants Kiev to recognize that in the long run, it has to have good, by which he means respectful, even subservient, relations with Russia. For the West, Ukraine is an important, noble cause, but not central to its grand strategy. For Putin, it is a key Russian national interest. And Russia is next door, has deep ties to the country. Ukrainians have told me that Russian spies are active in every part of the country, including the government. So Putin can find many ways to keep Ukraine crippled, weak, and dysfunctional. Trenin speculates that if Moscow's negotiations with NATO were to fail, Russia might recognize the 2 eastern Ukrainian provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, where separatists have already proclaimed people's republics. Moscow has already used the same approach with Georgia, where Russia has recognized the 2 Russian-dominated parts of the country, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, as independent states. One crucial question that we should ask is, why is Putin doing this now? Partly he sees NATO creating a de facto alliance with Kiev, but Putin must be aware that this is a moment of Russian strength. At a time when there is a growing energy crisis around the world, Russia has consolidated its position as an energy superpower. Energy prices are rising across the globe, but perhaps nowhere as sharply as in Europe. The price of natural gas used by most Europeans to heat their homes rose by more than 400% in 2021. And yet in recent years, most European countries have been shutting down their gas production, even as they've been unable to ramp up renewables to completely take their place. The result, they are critically dependent on Russian gas. Meanwhile, Ukraine, which has received about $2.5 billion annually to allow Russian gas to travel through its country could see those revenues plummet if Nord Stream 2, a pipeline designed to transit more Russian gas directly to Germany and Europe, is certified. In these circumstances, sanctions against Russia could trigger an energy crisis in Europe on the scale of the 1970s oil crisis, which no European government would want. All of which is to say, Vladimir Putin is not engaging in reckless adventurism. He takes risks, but he has calculated the odds carefully, and right now, they're in his favor. Go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my Washington Post column this week. And let's get started.